All right. What I'm going to talk about today, I'm very pleased to do this. I look forward to talking about these two revolutions in communication. There have been a number along the way, but there are two primary ones that have occurred, and it's quite remarkable. The first revolution was in printing using movable type. This was in the middle of the 15th century where a lot was going on in Europe, and we'll see some of this as we go. The Bible played a central role in printing at this time. The printing press was a key factor in the Protestant Revolution, as we'll see as we go along. The second revolution occurred almost 600 years later, and this was late 600 years after printing, and it is made possible by several technologies. And here the Bible played no role in its development. However, the internet made the Bible freely available in many languages across the whole world, and I'll give you a few details about that. Let's take a look at life in the 15th century. 1 second. My voice is going away already. Peasants constituted 90% of the population, and they led a pretty tough life. The aristocracy was 5%, and they lived in palaces. And then we have the clergy, another 5%. 5% of the population being clergy is a large number. The majority of the peasants were tied to the land. There was no or very little social upgrowing. Once you were born a peasant, you were a peasant for your life. If your family was peasants, the children were peasants, and so on. The aristocracy, kings, princes, lords, all the rest of these, led pretty good lives, but they had their problems too. The clergy of all ranks, a peasant could aspire to go into the clergy, but probably would not arise in the ranks of the clergy. Now, very importantly, at this point, there was no separation of church and state. It was all intermingled, which created a lot of problems. The population of Europe at that time was about 70 million. Today, it's about 10 times that. But 70 million is quite a number of people. Diseases: dysentery, malaria, diphtheria, flu, typhoid, tuberculosis, smallpox, leprosy, and the Black Death. The Black Death came in waves. It's estimated it killed between 25 and 50 million people worldwide. It makes COVID look like a cold. If you see these little globes, those are hypertext links to information on the web. So I put them in there as I went along so I could go back to them. Human waste and animal dung was in the cities. There was no such thing as sewerage. When your bedpan got full, you opened the window and flipped it out into the street. And of course, animals walked through the streets, and we all know what animals do. There was very little understanding of medicine. For example, the first vaccination didn't come along to the 19th century. Antibiotics came along in 1930s, 1940s, and not available to the public at large until after World War II. If you're not feeling well, call a barber physician, and he'll come on over to your house, and he'll bleed you to make you feel better, and he'll cut your hair at the same time. There was a high mortality, especially among children. Life expectancy was 30 to 33 years. But look at the bright side of this. You didn't have to worry about dementia or Alzheimer's disease. Peasants' homes were constructed of wood and thatch for the roofs, dirt floors, and the home was shared with animals. So when it got cold in the winter, you brought in the chickens and the sheep and the pigs. Not so great. Urban housing was a bit better. It was made of wood, some brick and some stone. Some were 2 stories. The ground floor was often a shop, and now we see the growth of commerce in towns and cities. Manor houses, on the other hand, had many rooms made out of brick and stone, many servants, and they lived a pretty good life. Churches. There were small local churches. Some of them were very humble. Cathedrals and cities, monastery churches, and the granddaddy of them all, St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican. When you see St. Peter's, it looks big, but when you go inside, it looks huge. And then there was another revolution I'll just make reference to. In 1492, who sailed the ocean blue? Yeah, Columbus, the first tourist in the Bahamas. And you see the cruise ships in the background. Okay, now 15th century printing. A little background before that time. Paper was invented in China around 105 AD. Cloth printing was done there around 220. The Diamond Sutra is the earliest known book that's produced. It's a Buddhist text. They did woodblock printing in the 7th century, and they even invented movable type, but they had two problems. They used baked clay, which is too fragile to really work, and they don't have an alphabet. Neither do the Japanese. Now, Bibles were created by scribes, men writing. And it took a scribe 12 to 15 months to copy one Bible. I mean, it's over 1,000 pages. 300 sheepskins or 100 calfskins were required for one Bible. There was paper, but the durability of paper was not so great. In fact, durability of paper even today has a problem. It was written in Latin. The literacy rate in medieval Europe was something between 5 and 15%. Peasants didn't read. They couldn't afford books. It was only rich people or the church that could provide books. And that's where the people who could read were. Now, what are the essential technologies for printing? That is, printing has developed. You need an alphabet. Doesn't matter what it is, but you need an alphabet. You need metal casting to make the type. You need a press to push the paper down on the printing plate. You need an oil-based ink. Most inks at that time were water-based. Water will not adhere to metal, so you need an oil-based ink to adhere to the metal that is then transferred to the paper when you push it down. And of course, you need something to print on. The book format is essential. You can imagine trying to print on a scroll. I mean, that was not really very workable. But the book format they call the codex was invented by ancient people in Rome. Now, how many have heard of Johannes Gensfleisch? Anybody hear of Johannes Gensfleisch? Gensfleisch in German literally means goose flesh. He's also known as Johannes Gensfleisch zur Lorrin. Lorrin was the building he lived in. They didn't have street addresses, but you took on your name of where you lived in a building. He's also known as Johannes Gensfleisch zur Lorrin zum Gutenberg. Now, we know him today as Johannes Gutenberg. Now, this picture of him was created about 100 years after his death. We really don't know what he looks like. He was born sometime between 1393 and 1406. Nobody knows for sure. Generally, it's given he was born in 1400. From a well-to-do family. He was a goldsmith, a gem cutter, and a metallurgist. He was well trained. He worked in an ecclesiastical mint in Mainz. Now that should ring a bell. The church is minting money. The church controls the money. Talk about no separation of church and state. Maybe he got a bachelor's degree from the University of Erfurt, but it's not known for sure. But he did attend there. He died in 1468. This is a recreated Gutenberg press. This is what it looks like. It's not a small little thing. Here you see pieces of type. Each one of these little, I don't have my pointer on me. Each one of those little pieces of lead alloy has a letter at one end and it's flat on the backside. And they are made by casting. And you see what's called a composing stick. You put each letter one after another in the composing stick until you had a line of type, and you put that in a form, which I'll show you in a minute. It's very tedious. And if you look closely at that, the type is a mirror image of itself, because when you put paper on it, it creates a mirror image on the paper. So the letter P is not like this, it's like this. And it's asymmetric letters that do that. Now, asymmetry, if you hold your right hand up to the mirror, you will see your left hand. Your hand is asymmetric. Will you do that? Look at the mirror and you'll see your left hand. Give it a try. So here's another image of the Gutenberg press, but what's important about this image is 4 pages were printed at the same time. Now, here's what happens. 4 prints are printed on the front. That's what's called the first typesetting form. It's the printing plate. And you turn it over after it's dried and you print the 4 pages on the back. But you have to line it up right. It's called a 4-page signature. I've seen up to 16-page signatures in printing. Page 2 is printed on the back of page 1. Page 3 is printed on the back of page 4. Page 5 is printed on the back of page 6. And page 7 on the back of page 8. So you have one piece of paper with 4 pages on one side and 4 pages on the matching other side. Then you cut and trim and bind them and you've got a book. So this is called a type case, where all the type is stored. You can look at this as the original workstation. Here you have an uppercase where you put letters like capitals that you don't use very often. And down below you have the lowercase where you put lowercase letters, as we now call them, and uppercase letters go up above. That's where upper and lowercase come from. Now, what did Gutenberg print? A lot of different stuff. Calendars, pamphlets, some propaganda, letters of indulgence, a Latin grammar, a papal letter, several unidentified books. They're unidentified because scholars aren't sure whether he printed it or not. It kind of looks like he printed this book, but there's uncertainty. But there's no uncertainty he printed the Bible. It's called the 42-line Bible, 1,288 pages. It's a big book. Now, since you're printing 4 pages at a time, if you divide 1,288 pages by 4, you get 322. You need 322 printing plates, each one a letter at a time. There's some question whether he produced a 36-line Bible. Some scholars think yes, others no. But the Bible was the first major book printed in Europe. Why did Gutenberg print it? Money. The preparation for printing the book started around 1450, 1451. It was printed in 1455. It took 4 years to create those printing plates. Of course, once you get the printing plates created, then things really go. He printed between 150 to 180 Bibles. Nobody knows for sure. They were printed in Latin. It's in a Vulgate Bible, which is a Latin translation of the Hebrew Old Testament and a Latin translation of the Greek New Testament. 21 complete copies still exist somewhere in the world. There's one at the Library of Congress. 49 partial copies are still around, which is really quite amazing. Now, let me talk briefly about 15th century publishing. You had to have authors to create something. We still have to have authors to create things to publish. Printing involved making the printing plates and having access to paper as well as a print machine, of course. You have to tell people you've got something. It's called advertising. We're all bombarded with it now. You have to sell it. And you have to distribute it. If you're selling it to somebody in Berlin, you have to figure out how to get it to them in Berlin. And you have to warehouse things like the printing plates in case you want to reprint the Bible. And you have to warehouse the books that you printed. In the 15th century, the printer did all of that. Today, this is broken down into many different pieces. So here are two pictures of Bibles. One of them was printed by Gutenberg. The other one was copied by a scribe. They look very similar, don't they? How many think the one on the left was printed by Gutenberg? How many think the one on the right was printed by Gutenberg? The one on the left is printed by Gutenberg. What he printed was the text, the black text. He did not print all the color material around the side. That was hand-drawn. The one on the right was copied by hand. It's called the Great Bible of Mainz. A single scribe created that. They look very similar. You can download one of Gutenberg's Bible from the Library of Congress. It's in 2 files, and it takes, a minute to download, roughly, depending on any number of things. I got it on this machine, on my laptop at home. It makes quite interesting. Okay, along come now vernacular Bibles. Vernacular Bibles are Bibles not in Latin. In 1522, we have the first Dutch New Testament, William Tyndale's New Testament in English, 1526, Martin Luther's German Bible in 1534. That was a very important Bible. Martin Luther had the effect on German as Shakespeare did on English. Luther's Bible defined modern German. It's called Hochdeutsch. And of course, in English, we have a great influence from Shakespeare and from the King James Version of the Bible. Both things really had an influence on language. The Coverdale Bible in English, 1535, and the King James Version, which we all know about, came along in 1611. And there's a whole bunch of other languages, Bibles that came along. I'm not going to go through all of them. Here is the pictures of the King James Bible. What is shown is the Epistle of Paul the Apostle to the Hebrews. And it's in this sort of funky-looking font. It's very close to a German font. The name of it escapes me at the moment. But I've written what is there you can't see. God, who at sundry times and in divers manners spake in times past unto the fathers by the prophets. It's kind of understandable. Let me give you the NIV version. In the past, God spoke to our forefathers through the prophets at many times and in various ways. So the Old English is understandable. This is a modern German Bible. It was published in 2017. And if you notice that word underneath there, Luther Übersetzung, that means translated by Luther. You can buy it from Amazon for $25.75, the hard copy, or a Kindle book for $10.99. Now, here's a means of transportation from the 15th century, an ox cart with 2 oxes. It's equivalent to kind of the 18-wheeler truck we have now. Why am I showing you this? In 1455, all Europe's printed books could have been carried in a single wagon. This is from a book by John Mann. There just were not many books around. Now, let's take a look at printer efficiency. The scribes could write 2 to 3 pages a day. Gutenberg printing press printed 3,600 pages a day. A modern offset press and an 8-hour shift can produce 2.3 million pages a day. So we come from taking one man 12 to 15 months to create a Bible to Gutenberg's press printing 2.8 Bibles a day to a modern printer printing 1,800 Bibles in a shift. However, you can send a 4 megabyte Bible over the internet in less than a second. I'll get to that a little bit later. Don't worry about megabytes, just remember the number 4. Here's a chart showing the growth in printing. About 20 million books were printed in the 15th century. By the 18th century, almost 1 billion. That's real exponential growth. I've really tried to find numbers for the 19th, 20th, and 21st century, but it just seems to be unknown. The printing press had a profound impact on scholarly publishing, things that scholars publish. The first scholarly journal was Journal des Savants, if you'll pardon my French. It was created in January 1665. This focused on European history, and it's still published today. From my perspective, the first science journal was the Transactions of the Royal Society in London. That came along 3 months later. It's the first science journal in the world. And it's still published today in two forms. And if you'll notice the little note at the bottom, 1665 was when Newton received his bachelor's degree. So this is really the beginning of science and distribution of information. Here's a modern offset printing press. And back of where that man stands is a huge roll of paper. It's fed through the printer. This is a 4-color offset printing press. And the output you see in the foreground, you can see it's blurred. That thing is really spinning around. A printing press like this is very noisy, makes all kinds of real noise, and a lot of heat because the ink has to be dried as that paper runs through it. So there's a lot of heat there that's involved. It's not a pleasant place to be, but it's fascinating. We print at home. On the laser printer, for example, that'll print 36 pages a minute, this particular one. And the cost for a laser printer is about 7 to 8 cents a page. Or you can get an inkjet printer. The printers themselves are cheap. The ink costs a fortune, so to speak. And that typically costs about 20 cents a page to print and is usually slower than a laser printer. A lot more trouble. Okay, now we come to the Protestant Reformation. The Bible had a huge impact on it, including the printing. And here we have a gentleman named Martin Luther. We say Luther. The Germans say Luther, if you pardon my thick American accent. There's no TH sound in German. What about this fellow? Here's a picture of him at age 46. Age 63, he's put on a little weight. And he died at age 63. He was born in Eisleben in 1483. It's in what used to be East Germany. Today it's known as Lutherstadt Eisleben. They had to get the Luther bit in there, for propaganda. Luther was born. It's listed as a copper miner. He was not a miner. He wasn't down there digging. He either owned the mine or he was selling copper somehow. He had a real business going. Martin Luther studied at the University of Erfurt in 1501. He joined the Augustinian monastic order in 1505. He was ordained as a pastor in 1507 at the Erfurt Cathedral. The Erfurt Cathedral is still there. It wasn't destroyed during World War II. It's quite a place. And then he started teaching theology at the University of Wittenberg in 1508, and he was a professor from 1512 to 1546. So his whole life, really, he was a professor. He wrote a series of pamphlets. Invariably, these were in German. These are English translations. These were pamphlets expressing his views about various things. He was awarded a Doctor of Theology in 1512, and he nailed his, quote, 95 theses to the door of the Wittenberger Schlosskirche, October 31st, 1517. Now, this is somewhat controversial. There are some scholars that think, nah, he didn't nail anything to the church door. There are others that say, yeah, well, he did. We don't know for sure. But one thing is for sure, I'll tell you in a minute, this is the Wittenberger Schlosskirche today. Schlosskirche means castle church. His theses were written in Latin. They were not intended for the masses at all. The English translation of his theses were a disputation on the power and efficacy of indulgences. Indulgences is the key word here. This is what he was after. Luther sent a copy of this to the Archbishop of Mainz, a guy named Albrecht von Brandenburg. This guy was knocking heads with the Pope. It was a case of the state versus the church. So he protected Luther. He also thought Luther was getting a bad deal. He wasn't getting a fair trial on all of this stirred up stuff from his theses. Luther's objective was to stimulate discussion of indulgences amongst the clergy and other academics. He wasn't trying to stir up everything, but it did. I'm going to read just 3 of the theses that Luther posted. Any truly repentant Christian has a right to full remission of penalty and guilt even without an indulgence letter. You don't need it. Christians are to be taught that he who gives to the poor or lends to the needy does a better deed than he who buys indulgences. But let him who guards against the lust and license of the indulgence preachers be blessed. Now, what is this indulgence stuff? I did a quick search of Google Gemini artificial intelligence, which was interesting. And from that I got to reduce the temporal punishment for sins, both for the purchaser and for their loved ones already in purgatory. What? A way to reduce the amount of punishment one has to undergo for forgiven sins. Payable in cash or good deeds, especially cash. Much high pressure in sales and corruption involved with this practice. It's also been called an adventurous fundraising scheme. It's been called many harsher things. Wikipedia has a long explanation and exposition of indulgences if you want to look at it. A leaked copy of Luther's theses spread like wildfire. Originally it was in Latin, of course. Several hundred copies of it were printed. Caspar Nutzel translated the Latin into German, and then it spread like wildfire. Thousands of copies of it spread across Germany. Now, at that time, Germany was not the Germany we know today. It was a bunch of small principalities. It wasn't until the 19th century that all these bits and pieces came together to form Germany. Back to Martin Luther. Pope Leo X excommunicated him in 1521. Frederick the Wise, Elector of Saxony, protected him. Here's another guy that was knocking heads with the Pope, so he protected Luther. Then we have the Diet of Worms. This is a city in Germany called Worms. It's not a little crawly creature. This occurred in 1521, and this is what Luther stated. I am convinced by the testimony of the Scriptures or by clear reason, for I do not trust either in the Pope or in well known that the God became anything safe nor right. Amen. a very profound statement. This gathering was, in essence, a trial of Luther by the Catholic Church. At that point, Luther was declared an outlaw by the Diet of Worms. His literature was banned. He was to be arrested. Anyone could kill Luther without consequences. It was a crime to give Luther food or shelter. Pretty harsh. Let me give a quick summary of Luther's beliefs. Individuals are justified through faith in Jesus Christ, not through good works. Does that sound familiar? Salvation is an undeserved gift from God, not something that can be earned or bought. The Bible is the only infallible source of religious authority, superseding church tradition or authority of the Pope. Every Christian has direct access to God and can interpret the Bible for themselves. Luther believed indulgences were a corrupt and unscriptural practice that trivialized true repentance. You can see why the Vatican was up in arms. In 1522, Luther published the New Testament in German. He married Catherine von Bora. It was a former nun. They had 6 children. From 1525 to 1529, Luther worked on establishing the new church, which of course became the Lutheran Church. In 1534, he published the entire Bible in German, and it was a big seller. Luther died in 1546 at age 63. Luther wrote a lot of hymns. This is a picture of the hymn book he published. I underlined in red what the first line was. Ein fester Burger ist unser Gott. Will you sing this one?
Mighty fortress is our God.
Yeah, mighty fortress is our God. Now, let's look at the causes of the Reformation. The sale of indulgences is sort of a pay for forgiveness of sin, and as I wrote up here, sort of, it's complicated. It was a gimmick to raise money, really. Simony, that is the buying and selling of church offices. Nepotism, we know what that is. Clerical immorality and ignorance. Clerical lavish lifestyles and lack of devotion. Abuse of power by popes and bishops. Here's 90% of the population seeing this going on. And now becomes the real struggle between the secular, the aristocrats, and the church. Now in Germany, as I said, it was little pieces at that time, but things really got going together, especially in Northern Europe. Now, what was the impact of the printed Bible on all of this? Of course, there was direct access to the Bible by the masses. And now with books out there, peasants started to learn to read. Challenge to the church authority. Printing encouraged literacy. Rapid dissemination of Reformation ideas in printed form. And democratization of knowledge in general. I mean, people really started learning at this point. And this happened. There were over 100 years of wars of religion in Europe. All these principalities against various Catholic principalities. Today, northern Germany is largely Catholic and southern Germany is largely Protestant. You'd think it'd be the other way around. In Europe in general, the farther north you go, the more Protestant it is. I'm not going to go through all of these wars. It was brutal. Huge numbers of the population were killed. And now we come to the second revolution. Not this one. This is the internet, which occurred in the 20th century and the 21st century, and its evolution is still going on. This has had a huge impact on our lives and the Bible. So let's look at the Bible right away. This is a Bible that is on the internet. Anybody who's on the internet has access to it. In English, here are the first 8 verses in Genesis. This is the NIV Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and so on. It's free. Anybody on the web, on the internet, has access to it, anywhere in the world. Here it is in Spanish, German, Japanese, and 36 additional languages. Talk about making it available. Now, there are about 8 billion people in the world. As I'll show you later, about 70% of the world's population has access to the internet and uses it. 70% of 8 billion is 5.6 billion people. 5.6 billion people have access to the Bible. That beats printing it on paper. Wow, I just said what I wrote here. So this is an example of it. I copied this screen and pasted it into here. You select a language you want, pick a book of the Bible, or you can search the whole Bible for terms. Once you're reading along, if you see a footnote, you can click on it and see the footnote. Or you can search for things like Nebuchadnezzar, and there are 89 occurrences of Nebuchadnezzar in the Bible, and you can click on those and see them. There were some Bibles that were digital before the internet. The earliest one I could find was called Verse Search. It was a study program for home computers, specifically Apple II computer. That's all I know about it. There was a thing called the word processor, the King James versions, that was put together by some Intel engineers. I think they were just fooling around and trying to see what they could do. There's a book called The Bible Library 1.0. It was on a CD-ROM. Rather clumsy, but it worked. In the 1990s, Bibles became available on various websites, all different kinds. 2007, we have the introduction of smartphones and tablets, and there are all kinds of apps, of course, available. I mean, smartphones and tablets are just computers. In 2010, the Biblica Zondervan Bibles became available. That's the one I just showed you. That's owned by a commercial publisher, HarperCollins. Now, what happened on October 4th, 1957? There's a clue there. Anybody know? Sputnik. Yeah. What does that have to do with anything? I'll tell you. It circled around the world going beep, beep, beep. That's all it did. And after 3 months, it entered the atmosphere and burned up. This was put up by the Russians. This caught the attention of the American Department of Defense, big time. And a few months later, the ARPA was created, Advanced Research Projects Agency. It later was called DARPA. You know, they changed these names of these things. A few months after that, NASA was formed. Now, 37 years of technical developments, which I'm not going to talk about. And what happened was the NSF net was decommissioned and its functions were handed over to telephone companies. NSF net was the internet. We now call it the internet. So instead of now being something involved with the Department of Defense, it was made available to anybody, essentially. So 1995 is a real turning point. Now, what are the essential technologies that are needed for digital books? You need a computer for individuals. You don't need a heavy-duty computer for this. Something of modest power, or a tablet, or a smartphone. You need digital communication of modest speed. You don't need real high-speed communication. What do publishers need? They need a computer-based composition system. Now, what's a composition system? Think of Microsoft Word on steroids, or Pages on the Apple computer. It's a page makeup layout and does a whole bunch of things. This is an exceedingly expensive piece of software. They cost millions of dollars. But you can't create a 1,000-page book using Microsoft Word. And a composition system is used to drive a machine that creates printing plates. And modern printing plate is a piece of aluminum, rather thin aluminum, and that's all there is to it. It's coated with a photoelectric coating. And when you shine ultraviolet light on it, through a photograph of a page, it dissolves the port that's to be printed. So you have an aluminum plate that's protected where you don't want ink to go. So what you have is a printing plate that sort of sticks out, ink sticks to it, and you can transfer that to paper. All this is done very quickly. So this is what publishers need. You need reasonably priced digital storage and a moderately high-speed digital communication. What do distributors need? They need a sales system like Amazon selling you stuff, inexpensive digital storage. By the way, Amazon has the largest number of server farms in the world, and a good number of them are out here in the suburbs. I think there are over 300 server farms in Northern Virginia. You do need high-speed delivery. You need broad bandwidth to be able to service a lot of customers. And we have today not just what's called the internet, but the Internet of Things. It does so many different things: banking and data, shopping like Amazon, research like Wikipedia, on and on and on and on. But I want to just focus a bit on publishing books. Electronic books, how do you get them? Now, there's been a dramatic shift to electronic book production in the 21st century. That is the last 25 years, and I'll show you in a minute. How do you ship electronic books? Wow, come on. The internet, how fast it goes. If you look at 2012, around the world, the average was about 15 megabits per second. Never mind what megabits per second means, just think of the number 15. By 2023, it's up to around 240 or 300 from 15. So in not too many years, the speed at which you can send stuff and interact has grown dramatically. That's called an exponential growth curve. It depends on which country you're looking at. This all works out. Now, how long would it take to download a 4 megabyte Bible? Just a standard Bible, no pictures or anything, just the text. 1993, it would take 37 minutes. 5 years later, 12 minutes. Another 5 years, 40 seconds. Another 5 years, almost 6 seconds. Another 5 years, 2 seconds. Another 5 years, 0.7 seconds. Today, 0.15 seconds. Now, that doesn't account for how long it takes your computer to react, or your modem, and so forth. Your equipment really holds things up more than anything. But the actual time it takes to zip the Bible over to you is a fraction of a second. Northern Virginia, in specific in Vienna, we have 5 companies that will give you internet access, for a fee, of course. You can get up to 2 gigabyte internet connection, $110 a month. I can't envision anybody needs that kind of speed. We have 300 megabits per second, and it costs about $50 a month, which is very fast. We get our TV over it, like I'm sure most of you do. So these are competitors. They all charge about the same. Now, you have to store a digital book somewhere, and it costs money to do that. In 1979, it cost $438,000 to store 1 gigabyte. And 1 gigabyte could hold 250 large books like the Bible. So, $438,000. 5 years later, $455, 2004, $5. Last year, 1 penny. That's the cost for digital storage. It's dropped like a rock. You can buy a disk drive from Amazon, 2 terabyte disk drive, for $110, and you are paying 2 cents per gigabyte for storage. If you're a server farm, you get it at a whole lot cheaper price. So how many people access the internet? In 2014, 35% of the world had access and used it. In 2025, in July of this year, almost 70% of the world has access. Now, I've got 2 more slides to show you. These are a selection of paper Bibles available on Amazon. I didn't get them all. I mean, there are piles of them. I think there are 21 here. The cheapest is $1.99. $2. The medium price, that is the price in the middle, $15. Digital Bibles, cheapest one is $1. The mean, $5. The print costs 3 times as much. That's it. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We will entertain some comments or observations, anything that you want some clarification. Sam, I don't know if this is being live streamed, maybe not at this point, so it's okay, you can ask your question.
That name Brandenburg, is that now where the gate, Brandenburg Gate, is named after that person? Brandenburg? I don't know. Don't know. It's not a common German name, is it? No, it's not. There is the Brandenburg device structure in Berlin. There is a town of Brandenburg, but I don't know the connection. That's it?
Okay, I'll ask one.
Yeah.
Yes.
Martin Luther was said to be highly anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
Was he merely a product of his environment, or did his influence shape German thoughts on anti-Semitism
Yeah.
in the centuries to come?
Yeah, some of the things he printed are still around. I mean, they're in museums. He was frightfully anti-Semitic, very hateful. The Nazis did, in fact, cite him as an excuse, so to speak, for the horrible things they did. Yeah, he wasn't perfect. He was a nasty guy in that respect. Yeah.
If I may also add a little bit to that, there was a whole discussion about Luther and anti-Semitism, and the conclusion was that partly he was a product of his time, but also I think his study of the Bible, particularly the killing of Jesus, which became a big issue that, the Jews colluded with the Romans to bring that about. And for Luther, that was a big thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were.
That's my summation of that.
Yeah, there was a congregation, that's not the right word, but a convention in around 1200 of the Catholic Church hierarchy, and they made it a crime for a non-pastor, a non-priest, Catholic priest. It was a crime to own a Bible. Only the Catholic clergy could own Bibles. Yeah.
I think that is something that we live with even now, but obviously the Catholic Church is opening up. But I think Lorrin made a point, indulgences. That was huge. Because, if you take that away from the Catholic Church, they couldn't have built the Basilica, St. Peter's, because that was a big thing.
Yeah.
But again, let's put our hands together and thank I always tell him that Parkwood is so blessed to have him and all the knowledge that he's been kind of sitting on, and I think we're going to tap that as much as we can. So we truly appreciate you, Lorrin, for everything you do, and we thank God for you. So this will kind of be the end of our session. We will dismiss, and obviously there's fellowship time in the meeting place. Just let's meal around and chat with one another. And then 11 o'clock, we will go into our service. And again, let me remind you, as soon as the service is over, we will still remain in the sanctuary. We're not going to actually leave, and then we will transition into our business time. And then after that, we will have our reception. God bless you all. Thank you for coming. Make sure you